Okay, so our last video for the digestive system, we're going to talk about cholesterol and metabolic rate, and then finish up with a few issues that we see with the digestive system. So cholesterol is normally found on your cell membranes, and that's really important because it works with your lipid bilayer to give it strength and kind of allow passage for certain things. But we also see it in our bile salts. So we always have cholesterol in our system. If you just look at the numbers, we make 85% out of the liver, but we also consume about 15%. And the type of cholesterol that we consume in that 15% can really cause your body to either be healthy or not so healthy, depending on how much, the quantities, and what types. So we have what are called LDLs, or low density lipoproteins. That's what that last L stands for. And those things, those cholesterols, latch onto lipids and they cause them to travel around our body. Now, in low amounts, that's really good. But if you increase your LDLs, your low density lipoproteins, they will start to cause the arterial walls to have a buildup of these fatty masses. And we know that as things build up on arterial walls, they can form kind of clots, and or they can break free and cause a clot somewhere else. So we want to watch the amount of LDLs that we put into our system, and it's also called bad cholesterol. And then we have good cholesterol, which is high density lipoproteins. And their job is to latch on to excess cholesterol. So they latch on to a lot of those LDLs and they bring them to your liver for destruction. So if you're consuming the good cholesterol, that means it will sweep through your system and pick up any excess LDLs, those low density lipoproteins, and they'll take them and transport those to your liver for destruction. So then we don't have high amounts of fats floating throughout our body. Most unhealthy foods, they will have more LDLs, or low density lipoproteins, or bad cholesterol in them, compared to those high density lipoproteins, which are better for you. Okay, so this is just a picture. You have plaque buildup here. You have your LDLs, which are in the bronze, and HDLs, which are good. And you're going to have both in your system, but these plaque deposits were formed due to the LDLs. So you can see all these bronze pellets or balls kind of all mashed together, and that's going to cause atherosclerosis, so the closing of your arterial walls, or your arteries, I should say, and that can cause a blockage or even a clot to form. Okay, so we want to increase those high density lipoproteins to be healthier for us, because they would come through and they would kind of bust up some of those plaque buildups, and hopefully your liver will then break them down and you become healthier that way. Okay, I'm talking about metabolic rate real quick. Metabolic rate, or your metabolism, is talking about how many, we call them kilocalories. Most of the time we just talk about a calorie, your calorie count. And really with metabolic rate, you have a basal and you have a total metabolic rate. So your basal is how much heat is being produced at rest, let's say over an hour's time, or you can do it for a whole day, right? And that's controlled a lot by what's called thyroxine. Now, thyroxine comes from your thyroid, and your thyroid gland is responsible for your metabolism. So some people have to go on thyroid medication because they're not producing enough thyroxine, or they're producing too much, or they're not producing enough. So it depends on what symptoms or what you have, or what's going on with your thyroid gland. Okay. So the average 154-pound person would, let's say they would burn 60 kilocalories an hour. So if we take 60, multiply that by 24, see if I can do my math really fast. That's somewhere between 14 and 1,500 calories, and that's you just sitting at rest all day. And that's the reason why our general look at calorie count is based on a 2,000 calorie day. And if you're an athlete, you obviously need more. And if you're not, and you're not active, you should keep your calories under 2,000, because excess calories will then turn into fats inside of your system. And we don't want that, because our body regularly doesn't want to waste energy. So it will store some of it as sugar, what we learned last class or last lesson, right? We store it as glycogen, but also for long term, it will store it as fat as well, and we don't want that really. So that's where those 2,000 calories really come from. That's the average amount that the person needs in a day. That kind of walks around a little bit, but does a lot of sitting as well. You have total metabolic rate, which you could see you have your basal, and then you have your physical activity, and the effects of just breaking down food produces heat. And like I said, the more active you are, the more calories you would take in. So your total metabolic rate might be higher than someone else that's not. Okay. Last thing is our digestive system problems. Some of you did some projects on these, but I'm just going to give a quick overview. Acid reflux. Remember, your gastroesophageal sphincter is not staying closed. So here it's closed so that hydrochloric acid stays down. If it opens, you have a burning of your esophageal lining, and you have what we call acid reflux, or we call it heartburn. If you have an ulcer in your stomach, that means that the hydrochloric acid is burning through that basic lining that's supposed to be there, right? That mucus lining is supposed to neutralize hydrochloric acid. But if it's not present, or you're consuming food that may activate more hydrochloric acid to be formed, it could burn a hole in your stomach lining, and then you can it'll be very painful. Cirrhosis of the liver usually comes from people that drink a lot of alcohol. Doesn't have to, but really cirrhosis of the liver is the shutting down of the liver, and it starts to harden. Sometimes it actually can become very, very inflamed, depending on what's going on the inside. But you can see here, this is no longer smooth. It's starting to harden, it's starting to shut down, and people get liver failure. It happens a lot with alcoholics. There's other things that can happen as well, but that's where we see it happening the most. It really just means your liver is going to break down. So everything we use our liver for, if we're talking about bile, if we're talking about blood sugar control, all of that will start to shut down. And your liver is very, very important in a lot of other things, one of them being like your immune system too. A few more. You have what are called gallstones. So we have our gallbladder, and you have these little stones that form due to those bile salts, and some people just have overproduction of them. Sometimes, depending on what you eat, can cause more of these gallstones to form because that gets into your bloodstream, and then your gallbladder obviously needs blood, and some of those nutrients get inside of there, or crystals, salts, and they can form these stones. You can get it removed. You can obviously live without it, but what happens to some people is it actually plugs up this duct, this bile duct and pancreatic duct, and then you'll have a lot of issues with breaking food down in your small intestine. So if it's that bad, doctors will go in and remove your gallbladder. You can live without it. Last two, you know what they are: diarrhea and constipation. That can come about due to the foods that you eat. It could be due to stress. It could be the consumption of certain things that are not good for you, meaning if you have spoiled food or food poisoning, it might cause diarrhea, which just means your large intestine is not absorbing water at the rate that it should be. And constipation is the opposite. It's absorbing too much water, or you don't have enough water in your system, meaning you're not consuming enough water, and it's causing your stool to be very, very dry, because your body needs to stay hydrated. And one of the main ways that we get water is in our large intestine. So if you're not taking in a lot of water, it's going to pull as much water out of that fecal matter as possible, and it's obviously going to become harder and very hard to pass. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about your body rejecting certain things when we talk about the urinary system as well, because it has a lot to do with filtering.